Hi there, so it's Uzure here again from Integrated Clinical Strength and Conditioning. So today's call to action is really for us to understand and appreciate some of the issues around time under tension. So time under tension is one of these terms which I guess in recent times has become quite fashionable in physiotherapy and also rehabilitation. Now, what do we actually mean by that? Now, if you're like me, okay, a few years ago, certainly, okay, I would use the term, oh, I'm doing time under tension, and this is a useful thing for tendon rehabilitation and such like. Bearing in mind that what we were trying to drive in terms of adaptations around tendon adaptation was things around improving both, so the connective tissue and the tendon mass. So we're looking for hopefully an increase in that cross-sectional area. So when we talk about time under tension, essentially what we're referring to is the repetition duration, okay? And the best way to think about it, really, I guess, is it's the sum of the eccentric, the isometric, and also the concentric portions of an exercise repetition. And often, okay, when you look in the literature and also you look in training plans, okay, for various people, okay, often they'll talk about a tempo. So for example, and you might see, the numerals. You might see 3 different numerals. So it might be, you might see something along the lines of 3, 0, 1. Well, what that attests to is, okay, the first number attests to the concentric phase, so that would be 3 seconds. Okay, the next number, say 0, so that refers to the isometric phase, and then the final number 1, say for example, might refer to the eccentric component, and that's what we mean essentially when we're talking about the tempo. So time under tension, best way to think about it is, okay, really, it was essentially about slowing down, okay, either the concentric or the eccentric phase. Now, when we were talking about tendons, obviously, because you'll know about some of the work from Hack and Alfredson, so he was the original proposer, okay, and author around the sort of the eccentric loading program for Achilles tendinopathy in the early 90s. And in essence, this time under tension has sort of grown from that, really, essentially what it's talking about, I guess, is super slow training, and it was normally the eccentric phase, but it could also be the concentric phase. So what's the rationale behind time under tension and really slowing down that concentric or that eccentric phase? Well, certainly, in essence, what it attests to is if we can slow down essentially the contraction speed, for want of a better phrase, then we take momentum out of the system. Which then means that if we take momentum out of the system, we might be able to develop more tension. Because I guess the more momentum you have, i.e. when something has momentum, okay, a body has momentum, say for example, or whatever, it means it keeps on going, doesn't it? So if you're using momentum, then the rationale, I guess, behind it was like, well, it meant that you weren't using as much muscle tension, and we know that actually muscle tension, we think muscle tension is associated with positive adaptations, both in sort of muscle fibre, motor unit recruitment, and also mechanotransduction. Okay, which is essentially what we're talking about, what we're referring to when we're looking for some type of structural change in tissues and such like. But fundamentally, what we think or what we thought was, okay, if we can decrease momentum, we'll increase tension, and therefore there'll be an increase in anabolic signaling. Okay, and that anabolic signaling, okay, is associated, okay, with essentially an increase in cross-sectional muscle area, and because we get an increase in cross-sectional muscle area, by default we make the assumption that actually there'll be a change in tendon and also connective tissue. No one's shown that that's not the case, so it's a reasonable inference at this moment in time clinically to suggest that actually we can use hypertrophy based approaches to improve muscle, tendon and also connective tissue mass. So practically, what does it actually mean for us practically? Okay, in essence, okay, when we look at it and we look at some of the evidence around hypertrophy training of muscle, and as I said, if we're talking about muscle, then we can basically also talk about tendon and also connective tissue, okay, to a lesser degree. Is in essence really between 0.5 of a second, so half of a second to 6 seconds. Okay, when we look at some of the research, and there's been quite a few studies to be fair. Okay, there's really a very small difference. Okay, in regards to muscle hypertrophy. So what I'm effectively saying to you is, between that sort of rep duration of time, so the time at which muscle is under tension, between 0 and 6 seconds, there's very little difference between the two. But interestingly enough, remember what I was suggested, we were talking about super slow training, so essentially really slowing down the time under tension, and and certainly some of the trends around time under tension and tendon loading, certainly 3-4 years ago, was really talking about above 10 seconds, so you would hold that contraction for above 10 seconds, whether it was concentric or it was eccentric, because we thought this would improve anabolic signaling and such like. Actually, the research in general is suggesting, and certainly anecdotally, is suggesting that actually there's actually a decrease in muscle growth and hypertrophy. Yeah, so it's an inferior increase with muscle growth. The longer you go on for, essentially because it's very difficult for you to develop tension. So you heard it here first, and I think this is a really important issue, isn't it? Because time under tension, we all talk about it, but we're not entirely sure what it is exactly we mean. But also, most importantly as well, we're not entirely sure, what the actual mechanistic adaptations are going to be at the end. And most of the work, which is admittedly around muscle hypertrophy, but again, we've said that might be relevant to tendon and also connective tissue mass, which is something that we might want to improve in our patients, depending obviously upon the pathology and their particular problems. Really is saying 10 seconds is too long, between 0.5, so between half a second and 6 seconds is probably okay. So I think actually clinically we can probably stay somewhere in the middle, 2 or 3 seconds to go down, 2 or 3 seconds to go up, or 2 or 3 seconds for concentric, 2 or 3 seconds for isometric is probably going to be more than enough. So you heard it here first. Don't forget, you can join our community. Let's put rehab back into physio rehabilitation, and I hope you enjoyed this very short video, and bye for now.